I've learned there are two types of people in the workplace. The kind who walk in, observe the room, and earn respect, and the kind who assume it's already owed to them. Karen was very much the second type. She showed up that Monday like a bulldozer in heels, a tailored blazer so tight it squeaked, a Starbucks cup clutched like a scepter, and a phone. In her hand she didn't look up from, not even while she introduced herself. "Karen, your new regional manager. Let's make this place great again," she said with a smirk that made everyone flinch. If you've ever trusted someone and got burned or watched a bad boss tank a good team, hit that like button and tell me your story in the comments. Because believe me, I've been there. Now, I need you to understand something. I was there, in that office, at my desk, in my t-shirt and jeans. The same desk I'd worked from for years. No nameplate, no title on the door, just the guy who always showed up early, stayed late, and brought donuts on Fridays. To most of the team, I was Max from Ops. But in reality, I was Max, the founder and sole owner of the company. I built this place from the ground up, back when we ran payroll out of an Excel sheet and made cold calls from a living room couch. These days, I preferred to blend in. No special treatment, no corner office. I wanted to see how people really acted when they didn't know the boss was watching. That day, Karen put on one hell of a show. She didn't ask questions, didn't try to understand the culture, just launched right into ordering people around like we were extras in her personal leadership drama. First, she tried to fire Dave from IT on her first day because his vibe was too casual. Then she rewrote our Slack policy to ban emojis. Yes, emojis. By lunch, she'd sent out a memo titled "New Command Structure." That sounded like it was written by someone who had watched The Apprentice one too many times. It included real gems, like "Karen is final authority on all departmental requests," and "Daily performance reports must be sent to Karen by 4 p.m., no exceptions." No one knew what to say. Most just blinked and nodded, waiting to see if this was real or just a weird onboarding prank. Then she spotted me. "You," she said, pointing across the room. "Are you facilities? Janitorial?" I laughed, thinking she was joking, though she wasn't. "I'm Max," I said. "Been here a while." She narrowed her eyes. "Well, Max, since you're clearly not busy, can you run and grab me a fresh oat milk latte? I don't do dairy." I tilted my head. "I'm not a runner." "Excuse me? I don't fetch coffee." Her face twisted slightly, like she was trying to remember what part of the corporate ladder I supposedly fell from. She clicked her tongue. "Right. Another one of those startup freeloaders." I just smiled and went back to my screen. No point correcting her yet. Not on day one. I wanted to see how deep she'd dig her own hole before I brought the ladder. That night, I went home and sat on my back porch, sipping a beer and watching the sun dip below the trees. The same trees I used to look at while dreaming up marketing plans and product mock-ups. I built this company with late nights and missed birthdays. I poured everything into it. And now Karen thought she'd waltzed into her new kingdom, ready to rule over peasants. It wasn't the first time I'd seen someone let a title get to their head. But there was something different about her. This strange, performative need to dominate, like she'd read every bad LinkedIn post and decided to become the villain version of girl boss. I'll admit, part of me wanted to shut it all down right there. Pull rank, drop the ownership card. Remind everyone who really signed the checks. But another part of me wanted to wait, let her write her own ending. Because people like Karen, they always expose themselves, and the higher they climb on their imaginary throne, the farther they fall when it all comes crashing down. By midweek, the office didn't feel like the same place anymore. Karen had replaced the bulletin board in the break room with a printed quote that read, "Discipline is more important than talent in Comic Sans. Taped up with masking tape. It didn't just kill the vibe, it buried it and danced on the grave. On Tuesday, she eliminated casual Fridays. On Wednesday, she banned all non-work conversations during office hours. By Thursday, she cut the team's Spotify subscription and replaced our custom curated playlists with something called Success Tones Volume 1. It sounded like a mix between elevator music and a dentist's waiting room. She wasn't managing a team, she was running a daycare for adults, and we were all in timeout. Her favorite phrase was, "My company standards," as in, "My company standards don't allow personal mugs on desks. My company standards require direct eye contact during all updates. My company standards say you should be grateful just to have a job." She said that last one to Sheila, our 67-year-old receptionist, who's been with me since the garage days. Sheila, who stayed late to organize our company potlucks. Sheila, who made everyone feel human when deadlines didn't. Karen told her she smiled too much, said it was distracting. I swear, it felt like I was watching a bad reboot of The Office, but with no Jim Halpert and a regional manager straight out of a villain origin story. I kept my head down, blending in like usual, taking notes, observing reactions. People were walking on eggshells. Conversations dried up, creativity shriveled. Our dev team went from bantering over code to whispering in Slack threads like fugitives. And still, Karen strutted around like a queen without a crown, convinced that compliance equaled efficiency. "You know," she said one afternoon as I passed by the kitchen, "I've worked with CEOs who respect order. People like you should learn from them. The messy ones never make it far." I smiled politely. "I'll keep that in mind." Then she added, "Besides, you're not exactly founder material." She said it so casually, like she was offering fashion advice. Like she didn't realize I was the founder she was pretending to have worked with. I laughed to myself as I headed back to my desk, thinking about how in high school I'd written a paper on Cheers, yes, the sitcom, because I believed good leadership was like Sam Malone behind the bar. Approachable, flawed, but always rooting for his people. Sam never needed a suit or a clipboard to be respected. Karen was the exact opposite, and the deeper she dug into her delusion, the more damage she caused. By the end of the week, she'd let go of Marcus from marketing, claimed he was too slow even though he'd just won us a huge client. She moved our UX designer into a closet space she called a creative isolation pod, and she tried to mandate 7 a.m. motivational huddles for the dev team, who, by the way, are legally not required to work before 9. Morale, gone. Trust, gone. Coffee machine, gone. Replace with performance tea. It was chaos. Polite, HR-compliant chaos. The kind that looks fine on paper until you realize your best people are quietly updating their resumes. I went home that Friday with a knot in my stomach. Not because Karen was hard to deal with. I've handled tougher in courtrooms and contracts. But because I saw what she was doing to the soul of the company. The laughter, the creativity, the sense of family we'd built. All of it was slipping away. And maybe it was the stress, or maybe it was the fact that she tried to cancel birthday celebrations because age is not a KPI. But something inside me finally clicked. This wasn't just a bad hire. This was a threat to the business, to the people I cared about, to the culture I'd spent a decade protecting. And the worst part? She had no idea who she was doing this to. She thought I was just another cog in her machine. Just Max from Ops. Not Max, the man who signed her contract. Not Max, the person who approved her onboarding. Not Max, the owner of everything her heels clicked across. It reminded me of something my dad used to say, usually after someone underestimated him at the car shop. Let 'em think you're nobody. That's when you're the most dangerous. I slept better that night because I knew what came next. A meeting, a microphone, and the moment she'd finally learn exactly who she'd been barking at all week. It was the following Monday when Karen made her biggest mistake. She called a mandatory all-hands meeting at 9 a.m. sharp. No agenda, just a vague organizational alignment briefing. Her assistant sent it out late Sunday night, probably thinking we had nothing better to do than read calendar invites over dinner. Most of the team shuffled into the main conference room looking tired, tense, and done. The energy in the room felt like the last 5 minutes of a bad date. You're just waiting for the check and a reason to never come back. Erin walked in like she was hosting the Oscars. Click-clack heels, pastel power suit, and a clicker in hand for her new favorite thing. Presentations no one asked for. "Good morning, team," she began, beaming. "I've spent a week observing, and I have some strategic thoughts to share about where we're heading." She paused, then smiled wider. "First, we need to start thinking like a real company." A real company. You could almost hear Sheila's eyes roll. Karen clicked to a slide titled, Phase 1, Cut the Fat. No joke, that was the actual phrase. And she started listing inefficiencies by department. She criticized Dev for over-collaboration, said marketing lacked urgency, and claimed HR wasted too much time resolving feelings. Then she looked straight at me. "And some of our support staff are redundant. We'll be auditing roles like Max's to assess necessity." People turned toward me, eyes wide. I smiled, slowly. Karen continued, completely unaware she was about to narrate her own downfall. "I believe in tough love," she said. "That's how real progress happens. We're not here to be friends. We're here to win." That was enough. I stood up, walked slowly to the front. Karen raised an eyebrow, amused. "Max? Questions can wait until the end." I kept walking, and I turned to the room. And I took the mic from the podium. "Actually," I said, calmly, "I have a few words. As the owner of this company, I'd like to offer some clarity." Dead silence. Karen blinked. "The... what?" "The owner," I repeated. "Founder, CEO, majority shareholder, take your pick." Someone coughed. Someone else whispered, "Holy sh..." I turned to the room, speaking clearly but gently. "Many of you know me as Max, from Ops. I've kept things low-key because I believe leadership should be earned, not enforced. I wanted to see how a new manager would lead without knowing who I was." I turned back to Karen, and now I know. She stared at me, stunned. Her mouth was open, but no words came out. "This past week," I continued, "I've watched the heart of this company, the people, get squeezed by someone who confuses power with purpose, who thinks silence equals submission, who doesn't understand that leadership isn't about fear, it's about trust." Karen took a half step toward the mic. I was brought in by the board." I raised a hand. "The board I chair." She stopped. I turned to the team. "The layoffs she mentioned, canceled. Casual Fridays, restored. Birthday cupcakes, coming back with sprinkles." A few people laughed, a few clapped. Karen looked like someone had poured cold soup into her shoes. I turned back to her. "Your behavior this week has violated every value we built this place on. And before you say, yes, I have the receipts, including the email you sent suggesting we weed out the overly emotional women. HR has that now." Her face went pale. She whispered something to herself. I think it was, "This can't be happening." But it was. I nodded toward the door. "You'll be escorted out in a moment. You'll receive official notice in writing. And no, don't worry about cleaning your desk. There's nothing there anyone wants." The room was silent. Then, slowly, people started clapping. But in that dramatic movie ending kind of way. But in that relieved, grateful, finally kind of way. I looked around at the people I'd built this place with. People who'd carried this company through tough years, late nights, market crashes, and pivots. People who deserved better than Karen. "I built this place on mutual respect," I said. "Let's never forget that again." Karen didn't say a word as security gently took her badge. She just walked out, eyes down, shoulders stiff, defeated not by a man yelling, but by a man she underestimated. A man who watched quietly, then spoke loud enough for everyone to hear. Karen didn't go quietly. By the time I got back to my desk after the meeting, my inbox had already lit up. She'd emailed a half-dozen board members trying to plead her case. "Discrimination," she wrote. "Unfair treatment." She even tossed in the phrase, "toxic work culture," which felt like calling the fire department after burning down the house yourself. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. See, when you run a business long enough, you learn not to let loud people rattle you. The ones who shout the most usually have the least to say. What I did do was forward her last 3 weeks of activity. Email logs, Slack threads, complaints from staff, and a breakdown of how her efficiency policies tanked productivity. One department head sent over a spreadsheet that showed a 37% drop in project velocity in 2 weeks. HR called me later that afternoon. "We've never had so many written complaints submitted in so short a time," they said. One employee literally filed it in Comic Sans with the subject line, "Karen perfect of pain." Even our janitor dropped off a note. It said, "She tried to ban Febreze, said it encouraged laziness. I use Febreze." That night, I went home and poured myself a glass of something strong, not to celebrate yet, but to breathe. The weight had been heavy, even if I hadn't shown it. You know that feeling when you dodge a bullet, but you still hear it whistle past your ear? That was me on the porch, listening to cicadas buzz, thinking about what almost happened to the company I'd bled for. She could have wrecked it. If I hadn't stepped in when I did, we'd be down 3 departments, morale in the toilet, and probably 1 lawsuit away from going under. But here's the part I didn't expect. A flood of messages from the team. For once. Not the performative great job boss kind, but messages from people I barely spoke to, saying things like, "I was going to quit next week. Thank you for standing up. I didn't know who you were, but now I'm proud to work here. My dad started a company and got pushed out by people like her. Glad you didn't let it happen here." It hit me harder than I thought, because somewhere along the line, I'd started thinking being invisible meant being smart. That by staying out of the spotlight, I could protect the team, the culture, the business. And in some ways it had worked until someone like Karen came along. She thrived in that gap, that silence. That's the thing about power vacuums. They don't stay empty for long. Karen wasn't just a bad hire. She was a test of my voice, of my values, of whether I'd show up when it really mattered. And while I'm not the type to talk about legacy or whatever, that week reminded me of something a mentor once told me, back when I was still building this place out of coffee-fueled dreams. Every company eventually reflects its leadership, so lead loud, or someone else will do it for you. The next morning, I sent a company-wide email. Subject line, "Let's talk." In it, I apologized for staying too quiet. I admitted I'd wanted to see how someone else would lead. But I underestimated how fast culture can rot when left unguarded. I told them what I'd do differently, and what I'd never allow again. The replies poured in. Forgiveness, encouragement, a few jokes about Karen, Season 1, cancelled by the network. One dev sent a meme of me photoshopped as Gandalf with the caption, "You shall not pass probation." That one made me laugh. But not everything was lighthearted. Some messages came from people who'd been triggered by her leadership style. They'd worked for Karens before. They'd been micromanaged, bullied, humiliated, then made to feel like they were the problem. And all they wanted was for someone to finally say, "No, this isn't okay." That's when I realized something deeper. This wasn't just about my company. It was about what workplaces should be. Not places where the loudest person wins. Not ego battlegrounds or passive-aggressive hierarchy pyramids, but spaces where people feel safe, heard, and respected. And yes, where birthdays are still celebrated, cupcakes and all. Karen sent one final email before HR officially terminated her access. It was short, defensive, and predictably dramatic. "You'll regret this," it read. "You just lost the best thing that ever happened to this place." I stared at it for a second, then I archived it. Because the truth was simple. She wasn't the best thing that ever happened to us. The team was. The people who showed up every day built something real and kept their heads down until they finally had a reason to lift them up again. Next up, we rebuild, we remember, and we come back stronger than ever, with the scars to prove we fought for what matters. The Monday after Karen's departure felt like a spring thaw after a brutal winter. The coffee machine came back. So did casual Fridays. Someone brought in donuts again, glazed with sprinkles. Sheila wore her sparkly cardigan that Karen once called visually overstimulating. The team's Slack channels lit up with animated GIFs, corny jokes, and the kind of inside submission banter we hadn't seen in weeks. It wasn't instant healing, but it was a start. I spent the next few days walking the floor more than usual, not as the boss making an appearance, but as a human being showing up. I stopped by design, listened in on dev stand-ups, took lunch with the interns. No titles, no distance. Just people opened up, told me how afraid they'd been to speak up, how close they'd come to quitting, how they'd second-guessed their instincts, thinking maybe they were the problem, not her. It broke my heart, but it also gave me purpose. So I did what I knew best. I rebuilt. We held listening sessions, and I mean real ones, not corporate checkbox, feedback hours. I sat down with each department, asked what was working, what wasn't, and what they needed from leadership going forward. Some wanted better communication. Others wanted clearer boundaries between autonomy and oversight. A few just wanted their dignity back. I gave them all of it. Then I rewrote our company values. Not from scratch, but from memory. I pulled out notes I'd scribbled 10 years earlier when this place was still a dream. Things like, stay humble, ask before assuming, build people, not empires. We posted those on the wall, but more importantly, we put them into practice. HR got a full overhaul too. We brought in a new director who specialized in trauma-informed leadership. We introduced anonymous reporting tools that didn't feel like screaming into a void. We even created a culture committee made up of employees across all levels, because the tone of a workplace shouldn't be dictated by title alone. And me. I learned to step in sooner, to not confuse humility with silence, to never again let someone like Karen slip through because I was too busy being hands off. The truth is, I'd gotten comfortable, too comfortable. I thought being the quiet owner meant I was being smart, detached, strategic. But what I was really doing was hiding. That's the part no one tells you when you build something from the ground up. Eventually, it gets big enough that you have to choose, fade into the shadows, or grow into the kind of leader your people actually need. I chose the latter. There was one final moment I want to share. A few weeks later, during our All-Hands Friday wrap-up, Sheila stood up. She was holding a card, and it was handmade, signed by every department. Inside was a short note to Max. Thank you for protecting what matters. I don't cry easily, but that moment, that one got me. It wasn't just a thank you card. It was a sign that the trust was coming back, that we'd survived the storm, and we were better for it. So here's what I'll say to anyone who's ever been steamrolled by someone with a title and no heart. Their silence doesn't mean you're powerless, and their volume doesn't make them right. Speak up, stand firm, and never let someone mistake your kindness for weakness. Karen thought she was untouchable, but in the end, she touched the one nerve you don't mess with. My people. And that's when everything changed. Thanks for listening to my story. If anything here reminded you of your own life, drop a comment, like, and subscribe. I'd love to hear from you.